President Vladimir Putin has ordered Russian authorities to provide everything necessary for soldiers injured in Ukraine to adapt to life after the war. Speaking at a meeting with senior defense officials in Moscow, Putin emphasized that the state carries what he called an absolute obligation to wounded servicemen. The message was unambiguous. Russia must take care of those who have sacrificed their bodies in what Moscow calls its special military operation. A person fought and sustained a severe injury, Putin said. And of course, the state is obliged to provide everything to ensure he feels as useful as possible, not only within his work or service in the Ministry of Defense, but also outside the ministry. The remarks highlight the growing human cost of Russia's nearly 3-year military campaign in Ukraine, and the Kremlin's recognition that hundreds of thousands of wounded soldiers will need long-term support as they return to civilian life. For Putin, the speech served multiple purposes, demonstrating concern for the troops, reinforcing the narrative that their sacrifice is valued, and signaling to potential recruits that Russia will take care of them if they are injured. The timing was deliberate, delivered as Russia approaches the 3rd anniversary of its military operation and as diplomatic efforts to end the conflict intensify. Putin made clear that support for wounded soldiers cannot end with medical treatment. He emphasized that housing must be adapted for their needs and access to sport must be guaranteed. How much time will it take to fully engage in sports and for his living situation to be completely adapted to the condition he found himself in after his injury? Putin asked rhetorically. This absolutely must be done. The emphasis on sport is notable. Putin has long promoted athletic achievement as a symbol of Russian strength and resilience. Russia has invested in adaptive sports programs and promoted Paralympic achievements as evidence of national character. By ensuring wounded veterans can participate in sports, the Kremlin is sending a message that injury does not mean the end of an active, meaningful life. The housing adaptation requirement acknowledges a practical reality. Many wounded soldiers will return to homes that are not equipped for wheelchairs, prosthetics, or other accessibility needs. In rural Russia, where many soldiers originate, housing stock is often old and poorly maintained. Adapting these homes will require significant investment in infrastructure, from accessible bathrooms to ramps and modified doorways. Putin's public commitment puts pressure on local authorities to deliver. The scale of Russia's casualty crisis is staggering. Western estimates suggest that Russian casualties, killed and wounded combined, may have reached approximately 1 million by mid-2025. The exact numbers are impossible to verify. Russia does not publish casualty figures, and both sides have strong incentives to minimize their own losses while exaggerating those of the enemy. But the sheer volume of wounded soldiers requiring care is placing unprecedented strain on Russia's healthcare system and social services. To put the scale in perspective, Russia's military casualties in Ukraine may already exceed total Soviet losses during the entire decade-long war in Afghanistan, a conflict that contributed to the destabilization of the Soviet state. Reports have emerged of wounded soldiers being sent back to the front lines before fully recovering, a sign of the manpower pressures facing Russian commanders. The Russian military has struggled to maintain troop levels despite offering increasingly generous financial incentives for new recruits. For the families of wounded soldiers, the situation is often dire. Reports of delayed payments, bureaucratic obstacles, and inadequate medical care have surfaced despite the Kremlin's public commitments. Putin himself acknowledged systemic problems during his year-end press conference, pointing to excessive bureaucracy and coordination failures between social services and the Ministry of Defense. During the same meeting, Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov reported significant territorial gains by Russian forces. According to Gerasimov, Russian troops captured more than 700 square kilometers and 32 settlements in December alone. For the full year of 2025, Gerasimov claimed Russian forces seized 6,640 square kilometers and 334 settlements. The Russian army is confidently advancing while Ukrainian forces are retreating along the entire front line, Gerasimov told Putin and assembled military commanders. The meeting was choreographed for maximum effect. Putin sat at the head of a long table with Gerasimov and other commanders arrayed before him. Maps displayed on screens showed Russian advances across multiple fronts. The visual message was clear: Russia is winning, its military is competent, and its leadership is in control. The figures, if accurate, would represent a significant acceleration in Russia's rate of advance. December's claimed gains would be the fastest pace of territorial acquisition since the early months of the war. However, these claims should be treated with caution. The Kremlin has a history of exaggerating battlefield successes, and independent analysts have challenged many of Russia's recent territorial claims. The Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank that closely tracks the conflict, has challenged Russia's territorial claims. According to ISW analysis, Russian forces have seized approximately 4,700 square kilometers in 2025, significantly less than the 6,640 square kilometers claimed by Gerasimov. ISW noted that even Russia's more exaggerated claim only amounts to an area slightly larger than the state of Delaware, or just 1.04% of Ukraine's total land area. The think tank argued that Gerasimov's claims actually demonstrate the slow pace of Russian advances and undermine the Kremlin's ongoing cognitive warfare effort to portray a Russian battlefield victory in Ukraine and the collapse of Ukrainian defenses as inevitable. Putin has also made specific claims about capturing towns like Siversk, Vovchansk, and portions of Lyman and Kostiantynivka. ISW has disputed most of these claims, noting that satellite and open-source visual evidence contradict Putin's statements. Even pro-Russian military bloggers have questioned some of the Kremlin's more expansive territorial claims. Looking ahead, Putin ordered Russian forces to press forward with efforts to take full control of southern Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region. It's necessary to continue the operation to gain control of the city of Zaporizhzhia, Putin told his generals during the meeting. The city of Zaporizhzhia, which remains under Ukrainian control, is home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant, currently occupied by Russian forces since the early days of the invasion. Taking the city itself would be a significant strategic and symbolic victory for Moscow. The nuclear plant has been a source of international concern throughout the conflict. Both sides have accused the other of shelling the facility, raising fears of a potential nuclear accident. Russian control of both the plant and the city would eliminate this flashpoint, though it would also give Moscow control of a significant source of electrical power. Gerasimov reported that Russian forces are advancing towards Zaporizhzhia and fighting for the town of Orekhovo. He claimed Russian troops are now within 15 kilometers of the regional capital. For Ukraine, defending Zaporizhzhia is critical. The city is a major industrial center and controls access to the Dnipro River. Its fall would represent one of the most significant Ukrainian losses since the early months of the war. In the Kharkiv region, Russian commanders claimed progress in their long-running effort to capture Kupyansk. Western grouping of forces commander Colonel General Sergei Kuzovlev reported to Putin that Russian forces will complete the encirclement of Ukrainian troops in Kupyansk in January to February 2026. The timeline is notable. Russian officials have been claiming imminent victory at Kupyansk for months. The fact that encirclement is now projected for early 2026 suggests the operation is proceeding more slowly than commanders anticipated. Kupyansk sits at a critical junction of road and rail lines. Its capture would give Russia control of logistics routes that have been used to supply Ukrainian forces across the northeastern front. The city changed hands in the early months of the war, initially falling to Russian forces before being liberated by Ukraine in its 2022 counteroffensive. ISW noted that Russian forces have been making claims about nearly completing the seizure of Kupyansk for an extended period, calling the slow pace incredibly slow given the length of time Russian officials have been predicting victory there. In Ukraine's Sumy region, which borders Russia, commanders reported the establishment of a significant buffer zone. According to the commander of Russia's northern grouping, Russia's security buffer zone in Sumy region now exceeds 16 kilometers in depth and stretches roughly 60 kilometers along the front. The implication is that Russian forces have advanced to within approximately 20 kilometers of Sumy city itself. Though ISW noted this actually represents an advance of under 7 kilometers from Russia's deepest positions near the international border. The Sumy operation represents Russia's effort to push Ukrainian forces further from the Russian border, reducing the threat of cross-border strikes. Throughout the conflict, Ukraine has conducted raids and artillery strikes into Russian territory from positions near the border. Creating a buffer zone is intended to make such attacks more difficult. For Ukraine, the loss of territory in Sumy region adds to the pressure on an already stretched military. The civilian population of the border region has largely evacuated, leaving ghost towns and abandoned farms across the landscape. Beyond immediate care for wounded soldiers, Putin has enacted sweeping policies designed to elevate veterans as a new Russian elite. The Time of Heroes program, announced in February 2024, provides military veterans with training, work experience, and access to valuable networks, fast-tracking them into political positions. Of the initial class of 83 participants, several have already been given major positions, including presidential envoy to the Ural Federal District and acting governor of the Tambov region. Putin announced that the program would be expanded significantly beginning in 2025. The program represents a deliberate effort to reshape Russia's political class. By bringing combat veterans into positions of power, Putin is creating a new generation of leaders whose formative experience was the war in Ukraine and whose loyalty was forged on the battlefield. The program appeals to Putin for multiple reasons. He has long favored what Russians call siloviki, people with backgrounds in law enforcement, military, paramilitary, or intelligence organizations. By creating a pathway from the battlefield to political power, Putin is cultivating a new generation of loyalists whose careers and status depend entirely on him. Russia has dramatically increased financial incentives for military service, transforming soldiers into some of the country's highest earners. Salaries of 200,000 rubles per month, more than $2,000, are now typical for combat soldiers, placing them in the top 10% of Russian earners. In addition to high salaries, families of volunteer soldiers are eligible for low-interest mortgages and generous compensation if the soldier is killed or permanently disabled. In some Russian regions, more than half of social welfare budgets are now going to soldiers and their families. This influx of money has transformed communities in Russia's most economically deprived regions. Villages that had been experiencing population decline for decades are suddenly flush with cash. New cars appear on streets, homes are renovated, and local economies show signs of life. The financial incentives serve multiple purposes: attracting new recruits, maintaining morale among those already serving, and creating a constituency with a material stake in the continuation of the war. Veterans who have benefited from wartime wages have an interest in policies that maintain or expand those benefits. Despite the Kremlin's public commitments, reports suggest significant gaps between rhetoric and reality for soldiers and their families. During Putin's year-end press conference, several questions came via video messages from soldiers and their families describing problems. One described a wounded serviceman whose contract payments had not been fully delivered. Another came from the mother of a fallen soldier who struggled to receive her son's medal for heroism. A widow from Novosibirsk appeared in a video message saying she was left raising 2 young children after her husband was killed in 2024 and had not received a survivor's pension. Putin responded by saying her case was now under control and offering a personal apology. The fact that these complaints reached Putin's annual press conference, a carefully managed event, suggests that the problems are widespread enough that they could not be entirely suppressed. The president acknowledged excessive bureaucracy and coordination failures between social services and the Ministry of Defense, saying those gaps must be fixed. These public acknowledgments of failure are unusual for Putin, who typically projects an image of a smoothly functioning state. Russia's history offers a cautionary tale about the consequences of neglecting veterans. The Afghansi, veterans of the Soviet War in Afghanistan, initially received scant benefits unless they had been severely wounded. It was only in 1983, 4 years after the war started, that they were awarded combat veteran status and associated benefits. The failure to properly support Afghan veterans, coupled with the declining Soviet economy, created an aggrieved class. Many Afghansi organized as criminal groups or political movements, becoming both symbolic and physical sources of destabilization in the late Soviet period. Some became enforcers for criminal organizations that proliferated as the Soviet Union collapsed. Putin appears determined to avoid repeating this mistake. By elevating current veterans as heroes and providing extensive benefits, the Kremlin hopes to create a loyal constituency rather than a disaffected underclass. The scale of the current conflict dwarfs Afghanistan, however. The number of veterans requiring support will be far greater, making the challenge of integration correspondingly more difficult. Putin's speech on wounded soldiers came against the backdrop of a claimed drone attack on his residence in the Novgorod region. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov alleged that Ukraine launched 91 drones targeting Putin's residence at Valdai overnight. Russia claims all drones were intercepted with no damage or casualties. The Valdai residence has been used by Russian leaders for decades. Located on a lake in the Novgorod region, it serves as a retreat for high-level meetings and diplomatic encounters. If Ukrainian drones did indeed reach the vicinity of such a sensitive location, it would represent a significant intelligence and operational achievement. Ukraine immediately denied the accusation. President Zelensky called Russia's claim a complete fabrication designed to justify future strikes on Ukraine and undermine peace talks. No independent evidence has corroborated Russia's claims. Residents of Valdai told independent journalists they heard no explosions or drone activity overnight. The timing of the alleged attack, coming just after Zelensky met with President Trump in Florida, led some analysts to suggest Russia may have fabricated or exaggerated the incident to test Trump's reaction or create a pretext for escalation. President Donald Trump confirmed he learned about the alleged attack from Putin during a phone call. President Putin told me about it early in the morning, Trump said. He said he was attacked. It's no good. It's no good. Trump's reaction was notably sympathetic to Putin. I was very angry about it, the American president said. It's not the right time to attack his house. The comment reveals Trump's priorities in the conflict. His anger was directed at what he perceived as Ukrainian provocation rather than at Russia's ongoing military operations. When pressed on whether U.S. intelligence had confirmed the attack occurred, Trump acknowledged uncertainty. It's possible it didn't take place, I guess. But President Putin told me this morning it did. Trump also revealed he had stopped Tomahawk missile deliveries to Ukraine because it's a delicate period of time, a statement that aligns more closely with Moscow's preferences than Kiev's. Russian officials responded to the alleged drone attack with harsh threats against Ukrainian leadership. Former President Dmitry Medvedev, now serving on Russia's Security Council, posted to social media accusing Zelensky of trying to derail the settlement of the conflict. In separate posts, Medvedev appeared to suggest that Zelensky should be exhibited in St. Petersburg after his imminent demise. Kremlin aide Kirill Dmitriev questioned the Ukrainian president's future, posting, "Who is after Zelensky?" Medvedev has become increasingly extreme in his public statements since the war began. Once seen as a moderate reformer during his presidency, he has reinvented himself as a hardliner, regularly issuing threats that go beyond official Kremlin rhetoric. The threats represent an escalation in Russian rhetoric against Ukrainian leadership personally, moving beyond criticism of Ukrainian policy to suggestions of physical harm. Beyond threats against Zelensky personally, Russian officials warned of military retaliation for the alleged drone attack. Lavrov stated that the specific targets for retaliatory strikes and the precise timing of their execution by the Russian armed forces have now been definitively determined. The language is notable for its specificity. Lavrov did not simply threaten retaliation in general terms. He claimed that targets and timing had already been selected. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov described the alleged attack as a terrorist attack aimed at sabotaging President Trump's efforts to facilitate a peaceful settlement. The warning suggests Russia may use the alleged incident, whether real or fabricated, as justification for intensified strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure or government buildings in Kyiv. Zelensky himself warned that Russia was preparing the ground to launch strikes on the capital, probably targeting government buildings. Ukraine has categorically denied conducting any attack on Putin's residence. This alleged resident strike story is a complete fabrication intended to justify additional attacks against Ukraine, Zelensky said, as well as Russia's own refusal to take necessary steps to end the war. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha noted, "Almost a day passed and Russia still hasn't provided any plausible evidence to its accusations." The denial was supported by independent reporting. According to the Moscow Times, 14 residents of Valdai told independent journalists they heard no explosions, received no drone warnings, and saw no signs of a large-scale attack. The absence of corroborating evidence is striking. A drone attack involving 91 aircraft would be one of the largest single operations of the war. Such an attack would likely generate observable evidence: air defense activity, debris, explosions, smoke. For Ukraine, Russia's claims represent a familiar pattern, using alleged provocations to justify escalation while deflecting responsibility for the continuation of the conflict. The alleged drone attack has complicated ongoing diplomatic efforts to end the war. President Trump has repeatedly claimed that negotiations are making progress. "We're closer now than we have been ever," Trump told reporters recently. But fundamental disagreements between Russia and Ukraine remain unresolved. Russia continues to demand Ukrainian withdrawal from territory Moscow claims, including areas Russia does not fully control. Ukraine insists on territorial integrity and meaningful security guarantees. These positions have not changed despite months of diplomatic activity. The alleged attack on Putin's residence, whether real or not, has given Moscow a pretext to claim that Kyiv is undermining diplomacy. Russian officials have said the incident will cause them to revise their negotiating position. For observers of the conflict, the pattern is familiar. Periods of diplomatic hope interrupted by incidents, real or alleged, that derail progress and justify continued fighting. Putin's speech on wounded soldiers points to a reality that will shape Russia for decades to come. Hundreds of thousands of men have been wounded in Ukraine. Many more have fought and returned without physical injuries, but with psychological trauma. This massive veteran population will need housing, healthcare, employment, and social integration. The demographic impact is significant. Russia was already facing population decline before the war. The conflict has accelerated these trends through combat deaths, emigration of military-age men seeking to avoid mobilization, and the diversion of resources from civilian to military purposes. If Russia succeeds in supporting these veterans, providing benefits, political opportunities, and social recognition, it will have created a loyal constituency with a stake in the regime's survival. If it fails, if benefits are delayed, bureaucracy is insurmountable, and promises go unfulfilled, Russia risks creating exactly the kind of aggrieved, organized, and potentially violent veteran class that contributed to the instability of the late Soviet period. Putin's speech suggests he understands the stakes. Whether the Russian state can deliver on his promises remains to be seen. Behind the statistics and political calculations are individual human beings whose lives have been permanently altered by the war. Young men who left their villages and cities to fight in Ukraine will return, if they return, fundamentally changed. Some will be missing limbs. Others will carry invisible wounds, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, the psychological scars of combat. Their families have already paid a price. Wives have become widows. Children have lost fathers. Parents have buried sons. The grief ripples outward, touching communities across Russia. Russia's official narrative frames this sacrifice as necessary and noble, a defense of the motherland against Western aggression. But for the individuals and families bearing the cost, the political justifications may offer cold comfort. Putin's speech represents a commitment. The question is whether Russia can fulfill it. The scale of the challenge is unprecedented. Never before has Russia had to integrate so many combat veterans in so short a time. The systems required, medical, housing, employment, social services, do not exist at the scale needed. Building these systems will require sustained investment over years or decades. Medical facilities must be constructed and staffed. Housing must be adapted or built. Employment programs must be developed. All of this takes time and money, resources that are also needed for the ongoing war effort. Money alone will not solve the problem. Veterans need physical rehabilitation, mental health support, and meaningful opportunities for the rest of their lives. Building these systems requires not just funding, but institutional capacity that Russia has historically lacked. For now, Putin's words offer reassurance, but veterans and their families will be watching to see whether the state delivers on its absolute obligation.